It started with blue gloves, a hoodie, and a water bottle. That's all it took for our HOA Karen, real name Denise, to panic and call the police like she had just caught a burglar mid-crime. My son had just gotten off a long, exhausting shift. 12 hours working undercover. He parked outside our home, threw on his hoodie, and sat down on the edge of the driveway. He wasn't causing a scene. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just scrolling through his phone, catching his breath, and sipping water to stay awake. He didn't even have the energy to make it up the porch stairs. But Denise didn't see a man catching his breath. She saw something she didn't recognize. And for people like her, different always equals danger. She came marching down the street with the speed of someone convinced they were about to stop a felony. Clipboard in hand, voice full of authority she didn't have. She snapped at my son, like she owned the sidewalk. "This is private property. You can't just hang around someone's house like this. You need to leave, or I'm calling the authorities." I stepped outside right on cue and caught the exchange. My son looked up slowly, calm and tired, and said just loud enough for her to hear, "This is my house." Denise didn't even pause. "I don't think so. You're loitering. You people think you can just hang around here like it's a public park." My son didn't say a word after that. He just looked at her. He was clearly choosing silence over conflict. And she spun on her heel and headed back to her house, dialed her phone, and started pacing her yard, one hand on her hip, the other flailing mid-rant. It wasn't hard to guess who she was calling. 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled into the neighborhood. No lights, no sirens. Just a slow roll up the street, like even the officer wasn't sure what he'd been called out for. He parked right in our driveway. Then he stepped out, looked around, and smirked the second he saw my son. "Oh," he said, clearly amused. "Didn't expect to see you out of uniform." That's when Denise reappeared, practically speed-walking across her lawn. She pointed at my son like she was a witness in a courtroom. "That's him. That's the guy I called about. He's been loitering, just sitting there, looking suspicious." The officer turned to her with a raised brow. "Ma'am, that's Detective Ramirez. He works with us." Her voice cracked. "He's a cop." "Not just a cop," the officer said, folding his arms. "He's one of our department's best. And yes, this is his home." You could hear her dignity deflate like a pop balloon. My son stood up and stretched, giving a slight nod to his colleague. "Appreciate you showing up, John. Sorry you had to waste gas on this." Denise stood there frozen. Then came the excuses. "I didn't know. I mean, he looked so. I just assumed." "That's the problem," I said. "You assumed. You didn't even ask who he was before jumping to conclusions." The officer nodded slowly. "And ma'am, just so you're aware, calling 911 to report someone without cause is a misuse of emergency services. This time, you'll get a warning. But next time, it won't be just a conversation." For the first time, Denise didn't have a clipboard comeback. She turned around and walked away. A little slower, a little less smug. We thought that would be the end of it. But we forgot one thing. Our neighbor across the street had a Ring doorbell. And the whole incident, caught in perfect 1080p. Later that night, they uploaded the video to our neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "When HOA Karen calls the cops on an undercover cop." It didn't take long to go viral, at least by small-town standards. Hundreds of comments, dozens of shares, and emojis everywhere. People couldn't get enough. "Not the clipboard again, Skull," she really said, "you people." In 2025, Detective Ramirez deserves a trophy for not laughing in her face. The next day, people who had never even spoken to us before gave little nods, thumbs up, or slow claps from across their lawns. As for Denise, she disappeared faster than HOA dues after a budget cut. No morning walks with a clipboard. No passive-aggressive flyers about lawn heights. No surprise HOA compliance checks. Nothing. A week later, the HOA board emailed a new memo. Apparently, Denise's behavior was addressed directly. It read, "Residents are encouraged not to confront individuals based on assumptions. Any suspicious activity should be handled respectfully or reported through official channels." It wasn't signed, but we all knew who it was about. My son didn't want recognition. That's just who he is. Quiet, respectful, professional. But his precinct still gave him a shout-out during the next meeting for how he handled the incident. A few days later, we decided to add a little spice of our own. My husband built a small wooden sign and planted it at the end of our driveway, reserved for loitering undercover officers only. It stayed up all week. And the best part? People loved it. Someone from 2 blocks down came just to take a selfie next to it. Even the local paper called us to do a quick feel-good piece about the story. Denise, she walked by once, didn't say a word, didn't make eye contact. No clipboard, just her silence, and her regret. Now, every time my son comes home, we greet him like royalty. Because sometimes, the people you overlook are the ones who keep you safe. And sometimes, the people who call the cops are the very ones who need to check themselves. She thought he was trouble because of a hoodie, but he was the law. And next time she decides to make assumptions, I hope she remembers. You don't judge someone by their clothes. You wait until you know who you're talking to. Because not every tired man on a driveway is a problem. Sometimes he's just undercover. 10 minutes later, a patrol car showed up. No lights, no sirens, just a slow, steady approach that made it feel more like a visit than a response to a so-called emergency. One officer stepped out, sunglasses on, moving casually like he already knew this wasn't going to be anything serious. He glanced around, scanned the yard, and then immediately smiled when he spotted my son sitting calmly at the edge of our driveway. "Oh," the officer said, chuckling as he approached. "Didn't expect to see you off duty." Right behind him came Denise, our HOA Karen in full form, charging out of her garage like she'd just caught a criminal red-handed, clipboard in one hand, phone in the other, marching like she was about to handcuff someone herself. "That's him," she shouted, pointing dramatically. "That's the guy. He's been loitering, acting suspicious, possibly casing homes. I want him removed immediately." The officer looked back at her, then back at my son. His smirk widened just slightly. There was no urgency in his tone as he spoke. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "that's Detective Ramirez. He works with us. In fact, he's been on an undercover assignment in this area for weeks." You could have heard a leaf fall. Denise stopped mid-step, mouth open. Her face turned ghost white, like someone had unplugged her emotions and hit the reset button. She blinked, then stammered, "You mean he's a cop?" The officer nodded. "Not just a cop, a decorated one. And from what I can tell, he's sitting on his own property." Denise's eyes darted to the house, then back to my son, then at me. You could see the wheels turning in her head, trying to find an exit strategy for the mess she had just created. "I didn't know," she muttered. "He didn't look like he belonged here." There it was, the line that made my stomach twist. He didn't look like he belonged. All because he was wearing a hoodie. All because she didn't recognize him. All because he looked different than what she thought a homeowner or a police officer should look like. My son stood up slowly, dusted himself off, and walked over with nothing but calm in his voice. 12-hour shift. I came home to drink water and breathe. I didn't realize that made me suspicious. Denise straightened her shoulders like she was preparing for battle again. "Well, maybe next time you should let people know who you are before loitering around like that." "Let people know." I snapped before I could stop myself. "He lives here. He's my son. He doesn't need your permission to sit in his own driveway." The officer cleared his throat, trying to stay professional. "Ma'am, we understand neighborhood safety is important, but this was a waste of our time. You called 911 over a man drinking water on his own property." "But he was sitting there for so long," she protested. "And he wasn't dressed like a police officer. Neither am I right now," the officer said, gesturing to his own uniform. "Clothes don't determine who's a threat. Behavior does. And there was nothing threatening happening here." It should have ended there, but it didn't. A couple of our neighbors had come outside after seeing the patrol car. One of them, a teenager from across the street, had their phone up, recording everything. Another whispered something to his mom, and she nodded, eyes locked on Denise. That's when it hit her. This wasn't going away. She was being watched. Not just by us, but by the whole neighborhood. Her reputation, the one she'd built on HOA fines and passive-aggressive flyers, was crumbling right in front of her. The officer took a small notepad from his chest pocket. I'll be filing a report just to document everything. Not pressing charges, of course, but there will be a record. A record, Denise repeated, eyes wide. It's standard, he replied. And ma'am, next time, please verify facts before calling emergency services. False reports can carry penalties. And just like that, he turned to my son, gave him a respectful nod, and headed back to the cruiser. Denise didn't say another word. She turned, stormed back to her house, and slammed the door behind her. The porch was quiet for a few seconds before my son said, "Guess I'm still doing undercover work, just not the way I expected." We laughed, but there was tension behind it, because this wasn't the first time Denise had overstepped. It was just the first time she got caught doing it in front of the law. The video, of course, went online that same night. Our neighbor posted it to the local Facebook group with the caption, "HOA Karen calls cops on undercover cop. Regret hits fast." Within hours, it had dozens of shares, hundreds of reactions, and comments like, "She really said he doesn't belong, Ikes." Imagine calling the cops on someone who outranks you in every way. Detective Ramirez is officially the coolest dude on this block. People who'd never spoken to us before waved from their porches the next day. One neighbor even brought over brownies and apologized for never stepping in when Denise had harassed others in the past. But the most unexpected moment came 2 days later. The HOA board sent an email to all residents. It was brief but clear. All residents are reminded to treat neighbors with respect and avoid making assumptions based on appearance. Unwarranted police reports can result in legal consequences. Community harmony is a shared responsibility. It didn't say her name. It didn't need to. Denise went silent after that. No more clipboard patrols. No more surprise citations about trash cans or lawn edges. 3 weeks later, she put her house on the market. Rumor has it, she moved to a gated community with stricter rules and less diversity. As for us, we got a new welcome mat that says, "Loitering allowed, especially if you're family." And my son? He doesn't sit on the edge of the driveway anymore. He sits right on the porch, boots off, coffee in hand, smiling like the king of the neighborhood. Sometimes the best undercover work isn't busting bad guys. It's showing people exactly who you are and letting their assumptions do the rest. Because when you look past a hoodie, you might just see a hero. And sometimes, the only person who ends up exposed is the one holding the clipboard. My son stood up, slow and controlled, calm in a way that only someone used to handling real danger could manage. He gave the officer a slight nod and said, "Thanks for the backup, John. I'll handle the follow-up paperwork." Denise froze like someone had just pressed pause on her entire brain. She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it again. Finally, she blurted, "I didn't know. I just thought. That's the problem," I said, standing tall from the porch. "You never ask. You just assume." The officer crossed his arms, his friendly demeanor gone. You're lucky he's not pressing charges. Filing a false police report is a serious matter. Denise looked down at her shoes, like a kid caught stealing candy. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood." "No," I said, my voice sharp. "You were trying to control it." She stood there for another awkward beat, then spun on her heel and stormed off. No apology, no explanation, just a silent retreat into her perfect little garage. And that's when the neighborhood really started talking. The video from our teenage neighbor had already gone viral in the local Facebook group. By the next morning, it had over 1,000 views, dozens of comments, and enough laughing emojis to crash a boomer's tablet. People we didn't even know started showing support. Some neighbors came by just to shake my son's hand. Others brought cookies, thank you cards, or simply nodded in quiet understanding as they passed by. But the conversations? They got real. One woman admitted that Denise had once followed her black nephew down the street, clipboard in hand, asking where he was going. Another said Denise had filed a noise complaint against her teenage daughter for playing guitar at 4 p.m. She called it a public disturbance. The mom said, rolling her eyes. At 4 in the afternoon. It was like a switch had flipped. Suddenly, everyone had a Denise story. Everyone had something to say. And now that someone had finally stood up to her, with a badge, no less, people weren't scared anymore. The next HOA meeting was packed. Like standing room only, wall-to-wall residents. Normally, no one went unless there were free donuts or a vote on new landscaping. But this time, everyone came to be heard. Denise sat at the front of the room, flanked by 2 other board members. Her arms crossed so tightly it looked like her circulation had cut off. She didn't say much, not at first. But it didn't matter. The floor was open for community comment. And boy, did the community comment. One resident stood up and said, "I moved here to raise my kids in peace, not to have them questioned every time they ride their bikes." Another added, "There's a difference between safety and surveillance. And what's been happening here feels more like harassment." My son didn't even speak. He didn't need to. His presence in the back of the room said it all. Finally, after nearly an hour of public feedback, Denise tried to defend herself. "I've always done what's best for the neighborhood," she said, voice shaking slightly. "If I made a mistake, I'm sorry. But I was only trying to enforce the rules." Someone shouted, "That's not enforcement. That's profiling." The room went dead silent. She tried to recover, but it was too late. The tide had turned. A motion was proposed to review and amend the HOA guidelines around suspicious activity reports, adding that calls to authorities must be backed by actual cause, not just someone looking out of place. The motion passed. Unanimously. Denise resigned from the board a week later. Officially, she cited personal reasons. But everyone knew the real reason. She had lost the neighborhood she thought she controlled. It wasn't long before the for sale sign popped up on her lawn. And just like that, the chapter closed. The weeks that followed were surprisingly peaceful. The clipboard was gone. The sideways glares were gone. People started waving at each other more. Kids played outside without judgmental eyes watching them. Dogs barked freely without a citation being taped to a door. One afternoon, my son was sitting on the porch again, coffee in one hand, a paperback in the other. He looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. "You ever think about moving?" he asked. I looked at the blooming hydrangeas along our fence, the familiar curve of our street, the neighbors laughing 2 doors down. "Not anymore," I said, because something had changed. Not just in the HOA, but in the air, in the conversations, in the comfort of finally being seen and respected in your own home. One day, a little girl from the next block walked up to our porch with her mom. She held out a picture she had drawn of our family, stick figures and all. "This is your son," she said, pointing to the one with a badge. "He's a hero." He smiled and knelt down beside her. "You think so?" She nodded hard. He stopped the mean lady from yelling at people. It was the purest kind of justice. And that's the thing about stories like these. They don't always end in courtrooms or with grand speeches. Sometimes they end on front porches with quiet smiles and kids who know what a real protector looks like. Because the truth, respect isn't about power. It's about presence. And my son, he's got both. Not just because he wears a badge, but because he earned his place right here, in his home, in his community, hoodie, coffee, and all. And if Denise, or anyone like her, ever forgets that again, well, let's just say the neighborhood will remember exactly how that played out. The doorbell rang at 7:32 a.m. the next day. It was my neighbor Susan, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, already grinning. "You need to see this," she said. She showed me her phone screen. A Ring camera video. Our driveway. My son in his hoodie and badge tucked away. Denise, arms flailing, barking about trespassing. And then, the moment the patrol car rolled up and the responding officer called my son, Detective Ramirez. The caption, "When HOA Karen calls the cops on the undercover cop." I nearly spat out my tea. By lunchtime, the clip had already made the rounds. It was posted in the local HOA Facebook group, the neighborhood next door feed, and somehow even showed up on Reddit. Comments came flooding in. People laughed. Some dropped popcorn emojis. Others posted gifs of people slow clapping or holding up signs that said boom. Then came the private messages. Wait, is that really your son? Tell him thank you for his service. Did Karen seriously just call the cops on a cop? Yup, she did. And she had no clue how deep she had stepped in it. I told my son what happened later that evening. He just smirked. I didn't think she'd blow up this much. Guess I underestimated her flair for drama. The fallout came fast. Denise, who used to march up and down our street with a clipboard like she was patrolling a prison block, suddenly disappeared. No more awkward knocks about mismatched curtains. No more flyers tucked into mailboxes demanding we repaint our door frames to match the uniform tone of the community aesthetic. The next HOA newsletter didn't even include her usual friendly reminders section. Instead, it started with something unexpected. Dear residents, due to recent events, the HOA board has enacted a new clause. No resident shall confront others regarding property or activity without cause or verification of identity. Harassment will not be tolerated. Translation: Denise, sit down. It was the politest public smackdown I'd ever seen. Neighbors who once kept their heads down were now walking taller. Conversations started happening in driveways, not just behind blinds. A few even posted their own stories. How Denise accused them of illegal gardening, overgrown hedges, and even parking a non-regulation bicycle on a front lawn. She had apparently tried to get a family fined for sidewalk chalk art. Their 6-year-old drew a rainbow. But what really cracked me up? Someone printed out a screenshot of the ring footage, Denise mid-yell, "My son just calmly sitting," and made it into a meme. It read, "When you try to police the police," and fail. It became someone's profile picture for a week. One afternoon, I caught Denise peeking through her blinds as a group of neighbors stood in my front yard, laughing with my son about his celebrity status. "I feel like I should start signing autographs," he joked. "Nah," someone replied. "Just show up next time with a clipboard. See how she likes it." We all laughed. But underneath the humor, something deeper was happening. The neighborhood was changing. A couple who had lived here quietly for over a decade invited us to a barbecue. Another woman, an elderly lady 2 houses down, brought over a basket of vegetables from her garden with a note that read, "Thank you for standing up to her." It was more than appreciation. It was relief. Turns out, people had been living under her shadow for years. Everyone had a Denise story, but no one wanted to be the one who pushed back until someone did. And that someone just so happened to be an undercover detective in a hoodie, sipping water in his own driveway. A week later, the HOA held a community roundtable. Open mic format. Topic: improving neighborhood unity. Denise didn't show. My son did, though. He didn't go as a speaker. He just stood in the back, nodding as neighbors told their stories. A man described how his visiting nephew was once reported for wandering. A woman spoke through tears about how Denise had knocked on her door just 3 days after her husband passed to complain about her porch light being too dim. The air in the room was thick with recognition, like everyone had been carrying something for too long. And finally, someone had opened the lid. Then a young teen stood up, shaky voice, clutching a crumpled paper. "I just want to say, I never felt safe here until now. People always looked at me like I didn't belong. But that day, when she called the cops on him, and he stood up, and everyone saw it, things felt different. Like, maybe now we matter too." You could have heard a pin drop. People clapped. Some cried. Others just sat quietly, holding their coffee cups a little tighter. That night, I looked at my son and said, "I hope you know what you started." He shrugged. "I just sat on the driveway." "No," I said. "You held the line." The next few weeks rolled on like a slow sunrise. Our community felt brighter, more open. Denise eventually took down her curtains and began taking silent walks around the block again, but no one paid much attention. Her power was gone. Her clipboard? Retired. And our mailbox? It got a hand-painted wooden sign beside it from the kids on the block. Detective Ramirez's watch zone. Funny how one moment, one misunderstanding, one voice raised at the wrong person, can become the reason a neighborhood finally wakes up. Now, Every time I hear laughter outside or see kids biking past my driveway without being side-eyed, I smile. Because in this little corner of suburbia, Justice didn't wear a cape. It wore sneakers, a hoodie, and carried a badge in its back pocket. And when the Karen called, Justice answered with a smile. My son didn't ask for a commendation. He wasn't chasing glory. But after the video made its rounds and the department reviewed what happened, his captain personally called him in. He expected a briefing. Instead, he got a handshake, a slow grin, and the words, "You handled that like a true professional. Cool under pressure, didn't escalate, and let the facts speak for themselves." That's how we want our badge represented. They even posted a note on the precinct bulletin board. Officer Ramirez, serving justice, one driveway at a time. He rolled his eyes when I told him people were asking for selfies with him at the local coffee shop. "Ma, I was just tired and thirsty," he said, laughing. But the truth was, everything had changed. Before, some neighbors barely said a word to him. Maybe they didn't recognize him. Maybe they made assumptions. Maybe it was the hoodie, or the blue gloves, or the tired slump in his shoulders after a long shift. Now people wave. They smile. They call him by name. One older woman down the street, Mrs. Carter, brought us a batch of oatmeal cookies in a floral tin box. She patted his arm and said, "I sleep better at night knowing you're around, sweetheart." A kid on a bike yelled, "Hey, you're the cop from the video. You're famous," and tried to high-five him mid-pedal. It was wholesome chaos, and my son, shy as he is, took it in stride. He just smiled, thanked them, and kept his head down like always. That's when my husband had an idea. He disappeared into the garage for 2 days with a piece of leftover cedar wood, a paintbrush, and an iron bracket. When he finally emerged, he held up his masterpiece like it was the Mona Lisa. The sign read, "Reserved for loitering undercover officers only." He screwed it into the wooden beam, right above the spot where our son had sat that day, right where Denise saw a suspicious figure and ended up the neighborhood's unintentional joke. The moment we hung it up, I swear you could hear the universe laugh. The next morning, Denise walked by. She didn't say a word. No clipboard. No finger wagging. No concerned citizen voice. Just a tight-lipped glance toward the sign, a quick shuffle of her steps, and a sudden deep interest in her own shoelaces. I watched from the porch, sipping coffee. She passed again the next day. And the next. Same walk. Same silence. Same avoidance of eye contact. It was almost funny how small her presence had become. Once upon a time, she controlled the street like she owned it. People hesitated to plant sunflowers, worried she'd report the unauthorized foliage. Families second-guessed whether birthday balloons on the mailbox might violate some obscure code she invented on a whim. Now, we had porch swings out front again. Kids chalked on sidewalks with zero fear. A neighbor down the street tied rainbow streamers to their fence for their daughter's birthday, and nobody peeled them down. Even our postman left a little sticky note that said, "Cool sign. Your kid's a hero." It felt like a spell had been broken. The mood of the whole neighborhood shifted, like people had just realized they were allowed to breathe again. And funny enough, all it took was someone sitting still long enough for the truth to come out. My husband started calling the driveway the witness stand. Our son just shook his head and muttered, "You two need less free time." But the best part? The story had ripple effects we never expected. The HOA board, still trying to clean up the mess Denise left behind, started drafting new guidelines for how residents should interact with one another. Not just about confrontations or rules, but about respect, about awareness, about giving people the benefit of the doubt. They even invited my son to speak at the next community meeting. He declined, of course. "I'm not trying to be the face of anything," he said. "I just wanted a sip of water and 5 minutes to breathe." But they respected that, and when they introduced the new guidelines a month later, they included a line inspired by what happened. All residents deserve dignity, privacy, and safety. Before assuming the worst, consider the best. That line stuck with me, maybe because it reminded me how quick people are to judge based on looks, clothes, or skin. Maybe because it made me think of every time someone clutched their bag when my son walked by them at night, even in uniform. Maybe because it was the kind of reminder every community needs once in a while. The attention eventually died down. The Facebook comments slowed. The video became buried under birthday posts, missing cat notices, and anyone know a good plumber? Threads. But what didn't fade was the memory. People still mention it. They smile when they pass our driveway. Some glance at the sign and chuckle. A few shake their heads in disbelief. I still can't believe she called the cops on a cop. Me neither. But I'm kind of glad she did. Because in trying to shame someone she didn't know, she ended up shining a light on a man she never bothered to see. A man who wore a badge, risked his life, and just wanted to sit on his own driveway after a long day. She tried to humiliate him. Instead, she humanized him to a whole community. The funniest part, she gave him the best parking spot on the block. Now, on warm evenings, my son sometimes sits there again. Not in uniform, just as himself. A lawn chair, a bottle of water, a little less weight in his shoulders. And every so often, someone stops to say hi. No fear, no accusations, just neighbor to neighbor. And that, to me, is the greatest victory. Because long after the headlines fade and the cameras go away, kindness sticks. Respect lingers. And people remember not just who stood up, but who sat down, calmly, and changed everything. One seat, one driveway, one silent act of dignity. That's how peace took root in our neighborhood. And Denise? Well, she still walks by from time to time. Still silent. Still quick with her pace. But she hasn't called the cops since. Sometimes the loudest lesson is the one learned in silence.